How are we doing today, gentlemen? We know that the travel plans have changed for all of you. We do know that.
Yep, no doubt.
A little.
I'll have some flight credit with American coming up here soon.
Good to see everyone. A lot of really good anticipated football games for the Big Ten and nationally taken off the board, of course. The Big Ten announced yesterday that it will not be playing out of conference games, strictly a conference schedule. And I don't know, gentlemen, I know that the talk was that the Big Ten would expand from 9 conference games to 10. I don't know if that's official yet. Kevin, why don't we start with you in regards to what was discussed on the call? I heard the news, instantly went live, talked for 2 hours, but you guys were right there to get the direct word.
Yeah, we don't know what the length of the season is going to be. Gene Smith spoke with local media, and some national guys got on the call as well shortly after the news came out. It sounds like we're a week plus out from maybe having some more details. 10 seems to be the number that they like in terms of what a regular season would be, but that doesn't even necessarily mean that we would see 10 games scheduled out at first. We may see 5 or 6, and then games would be held in reserve or whatnot and added on. And I think there's a misconception floating around out there too, that this loss of the non-conference means that the Big Ten would push back its start into October. That's not the case. Week 1, Labor Day, September 5th, being the Saturday, is on the table. Week 0, the week before that, could essentially be on the table. So we could be looking at 14 weeks or something to try and get 10 games in. And, I don't want to take all of the pieces of this and say it right now. I'll share some of it there too. But flexibility is a word that Gene used a lot. Just because a game, Ohio State, Illinois, is scheduled for Champaign, if Champaign, Illinois suddenly turns into a hotspot, that game could come flying back. So he was quick to say that there might be some competitive equity issues there that people are just going to have to kind of get over. And as I told a lot of our members over at Buckeye Grove, while this isn't all football, some football is better than no football. We still have to cross this finish line and get there. It's not going to be the type of season we're used to seeing in terms of what the look is going to be. But, I'm as hopeful as anybody that we will get to see this 10-game season.
Tony, before you jump on this, I started taking calls as soon as it was released, had basically no information, and people are concerned about college football playoff and equity across the board. I said, we don't have equity anyway. We don't have a system that's equitable anyway. We have a bunch of people selecting who's going to play in the invitational. Plus, we don't have equitable amount of games across the board in regards to conference play anyway. Whatever football we can get that we can put together in some reasonable fashion to determine championships would be great. Tony, your thoughts?
Well, the playoffs in the postseason were the furthest thing from Gene Smith's mind yesterday. And listening to him, the tone was, and you sort of adopted his tone. You're not even concerned about Indianapolis or the playoffs, because he mentioned the last time he talked to us in May or whatever, he was cautiously optimistic the season would be fine. He's no longer cautiously optimistic. I wouldn't say he's pessimistic, but he's definitely concerned. And so as you're listening to him, you're not even thinking about the playoffs. You're not even thinking about the postseason. And he said they'll talk about it next week. They'll figure out a championship plan of some sort for the Big Ten. Because everything, who knows? There may be no divisions. We don't know. I know ESPN was saying that they'll try to front load division games. They're still talking about that. They may. But 14 weeks, 10 games, conceivably, you could schedule 2 games starting week 0, a bye week, 2 games and then a bye week, 2 games and then a bye week. I don't think they would do that for everybody, because then you'd have weeks with no games conceivably, but you could stagger teams if you want. And now the thing is, if they start week 0, they're going to lose. So they've already lost some time, because the week 0 teams are already working out now. But I don't think it's a huge issue to lose 3 or 4 days of workouts and then move them to week 0 anyway. So it could be, we could be seeing Big Ten football here in August and then all the way through into December. So it's people a lot of people look at it as a step away from football, but this for me was a step towards Big Ten football.
I agree. I think that the next step is to cancel and abolish the season, or the nuclear option of trying to play in February, March, and April, I guess. I don't know, but which I find to be unrealistic just from the standpoint of why would somebody like Justin Fields, who's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, risk an injury so close to the draft. And it'd be like these guys that have skipped these bowl games here in recent years that aren't playoff games because they didn't want to hurt their draft stocks. So to me, I agree. If this is what it is, it's better than nothing. And I said this a long time ago, that whatever preconceived notions we've had about what makes a football season, I've been alive since 1968. Anything I've thought about college football from 1975, when I was aware of it, until today, is out the window. I mean, they are in completely uncharted territory, just trying to put people on the field. And I think 2 monetary things kind of come to mind. First of all, they've abolished the bye games, which Ohio State was going to pay about $2.6 million or thereabouts for Buffalo and Bowling Green combined, maybe a little bit more, 2.8 maybe. So, and if they weren't going to have even 30, 40, 50,000 people in the stands, they were going to lose their shirt on those 2 games. So particularly if nobody could come, I mean, that's just a complete $3 million you've just taken and flushed down the toilet. So that made complete sense that those were the first games that they abolished. And at the same time, they've protected most of their television contract. I mean, they don't have those non-conference games, which account for, what would it be? I guess 1/4 of the inventory. But to me, I think it's probably not quite that many, because you have the road games that aren't part of your package. So maybe 20% of your television inventory is gone, but you still have the meat and potatoes of that, which is the conference season. So Big Ten Network, ESPN, ABC, Fox, Fox Sports 1, all their partners can be made relatively whole still, and they can still bring in that money, because the thing no one's talked about is if there's no season. And I hear Gene Smith talking about how they would live up to their obligations to student athletes and to coaches, that no one was going to get fired or take a pay cut or whatever. Well, what's not being said is if the university, the athletic department, doesn't bring the money in, then that money has to come from the university, because it's more than the athletic department has in its reserves. And that's the same thing for Ball State, Indiana, whoever it is. The universities are going to have to underwrite some of this, and that's the last thing they want to do, because in a pandemic, are you picking toys out of the toy section type thing? So I don't know, just some general thoughts there. But to me, I consider this, like Tony said, a positive, that they're trying like heck to maintain some semblance of a season.
I know some people were thinking this was a safety issue in terms of why is it safer for Ohio State to play Nebraska than to play Bowling Green, when Bowling Green is 2 hours north, hour and a half north. And Gene reiterated it. It's not a safety issue, because he trusts that those teams would all follow their own protocols. It was all flexibility and keeping everything in-house, because it's a lot easier to shift to home and home, to shift a game from Nebraska to Ohio State or Ohio State to Nebraska than dealing with every other conference that the Big Ten schedule is attached to, or moving games from September 5th to October 24th. You can't do that with all of these other conferences involved, or if you might be able to, but it's just easier if you don't. And then, as Steve said, you can't afford those games if there's no fans in the stands, really.
So you don't think any of this has to do with, we know how we're going to house our players, travel our players, test our players, and we can tell our 14 schools, this is what we want. We can all be on the same page and we don't know what Bowling Green's going to do or the MAC's going to do.
Well, there's something to be said too about, systems in place. You know where you're staying when you go to East Lansing. You do that every other year, and even when you do in the other division, you go to the West. I mean, you're still in theory going there at least once every 6 years. You know what's going on. You know those locker rooms. Systems and protocols are very important. But yeah, I think you're going to see a point to where the Big Ten really wants to have its own bubble, so to speak, and handle its own testing and things like that. I mean, again, the way that college football is set up is different than every other sport in terms of it being, each conference is kind of autonomous to a certain extent. And I think that the Big Ten just wants to tighten the reins a little bit by keeping it within its own group of 14 member schools instead of, this isn't about, even if Ohio State had to go to BG, which is not going to happen, but if that's only a 2-hour bus ride, but that's strange hotels, that's strange, transportation or whatnot. It's just easier to go with what you know in these uncertain times.
And I think what I'll just throw in there is the Big Ten schools are partners, whereas Ohio State's not a partner with Oregon. They just have a contract to play each other this year or next year. Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, they're all joined at the hip and have been for decades and will be for decades going forward. So they share protocols, they share revenue, they share everything. They work together in lockstep, in concert. There's not a Michigan way of doing things and an Ohio State way of doing things. There is a Big Ten way of doing things. And when the presidents of the Big Ten, again, I haven't listened to much of what Warren or Gene Smith said, if this was initiated by the presidents or strictly by Kevin Warren and his people in Chicago. But when they come out, they are a united front. There is no dissension within the ranks on this. They have a united front, and I think that's what makes this a little cleaner, so to speak, for it to just be a Big Ten season.
I've been completely misguided for about 15 years then. Ohio State doesn't have a certain way of doing things, and Michigan a certain way of doing. Maybe Michigan should start doing things.
Well, you know what I mean. And presentation of the sport is more what I mean, as opposed to the way they're playing football.
Absolutely.